Psalm 23 is far more than a psalm that gives us comfort in death. It gives us confidence in life. Every woman longs for someone to protect and care for her, someone to guide her when she's not sure of her next steps, someone who'll give her rest when she's worn out and walk with her when the valley gets dark. The Lord is our shepherd, our good shepherd, and his companionship gives us the comfort and confidence that we all long for. Sister, the shepherd is with you, and you are safe with him in every season and in every situation. Psalm 23 is a spiritual lullaby that your shepherd sings over you in every situation and in every season. It's a psalm that can settle your fears, while at the very same time it stirs your faith. It is not a psalm for the self-sufficient. It's a psalm for those of us who know we need a shepherd. And I don't know about you, but I know that I need a shepherd. And so did David. It's a psalm of David. And David was a shepherd who became a king. And he wrote this psalm to and for the king who he considered to be his shepherd. Now, we don't know really when this was written. Some scholars believe that Psalm 23 was written when David was younger, a shepherd boy. But most believe that's probably not the truth, because if you think about the content of the psalm, the Psalm 23 talks about being in the valley of the shadow of death. Not many teenagers are really thinking about death. They're pretty immortal. The psalm talks about enemies, right? Teenagers, they don't really think much about enemies, but a king, he would have had a lot of experience with enemies, so most believe that it was probably written when he was older. In fact, some scholars believe that David may have written Psalm 23 when he was in a cave across the Jordan River in a town called Mahanaim, or something very close to that. But it was during the civil war, during Absalom, his son's rebellion. He might have written it then. And that's in, if you want to look it up, 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 24. But the point is, we don't really know when Psalm 23 was written, but we do know why Psalm 23 was written. Psalm 23 was written because we are all like sheep, and sheep need a shepherd. David knew this very well. He knew what it was like to be a shepherd, and he knew what it was like to be shepherded. And that's why he wrote, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside those still waters. He restores my soul, and he leads me down right paths for his name's sake. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, and your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and you anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." You see, David knew what it was like to be with his shepherd in every season and in every situation, and he knew what it was like to be safe with his shepherd. So my question is, do you? Do you know what it really means to be safe with your shepherd through every situation and through every season? I'll be honest with you, I thought I did until one January, sitting in my favorite restaurant, Tasia, with my friends Joan and Paula. So I hope you have friends like this, right? These are the friends that you can just call at a moment's notice and be spontaneous and go to lunch or go shopping. And so that's what we did. We went to lunch. And so here we were at our favorite restaurant, hot and sour soup, teriyaki chicken, and Paula says to me, "What's wrong with you? You just don't seem the same. What's up?" And I said, "Nothing is wrong, not one thing." And then for the next hour, I proceeded to talk about everything that was wrong. Okay, right? Have you ever been there? And as I began to talk, of course, I'm crying into my hot and sour soup. And I could trace it back. I could trace it back to November. That's when it really started. See, in November, I got like the best news ever. I found out that I was about to be a grandmother. Now, if you don't know me well, like if this is our first Bible study, you may be very confused right now. So let me just explain something. I became blind when I was 15 years old. So over the last 40-ish years, I can't believe it's been that long, I have lived in physical darkness longer now than I've lived in physical light. It's a disease called retinitis pigmentosa. I became legally blind as a teenager, and over the years, I continued to lose sight until now. I'm in my 50s and everything's dark. Well, the thing about blindness is it's loss, like any loss, but loss is like, it's a sentence that never ends with a period, right? It's always a sentence that ends with an ellipsis. It just goes on, and you have to grieve loss during different seasons in different ways. And that's what happened to me in November when I discovered I was going to be a grandma. And I didn't expect it, I'll be honest. I was so excited. It was just like the best news ever. I mean, I've heard that, that the reason God gives you grandchildren is because it's his way of rewarding you for not killing your teenagers. And so I had earned this, and it was so exciting. And I remember hugging the kids and being so happy until a couple hours later, I went to my bedroom and I realized I'm not going to be able to see that grandbaby. I'm not going to be able to see his face. I won't be able to see his little dimples. I won't be able to see how he'll put his little hands into fists when he tries to toddle. And I can't explain the grief that washed over me. And it wasn't just a one-time kind of being hit by it. It sunk me into a pit of grief. Every time a sonogram picture would come in, I would have to re-navigate the loss. And it just made me experience blindness in a way I hadn't experienced yet. And I felt so isolated and so alone. Well, then early December, my husband and I were having a conversation which turned into an argument, which became a real tense discussion. Some might want to call it a fight. And that's not such a big deal. All married couples, most married couples have arguments and discussions and fights. But this one really bothered me. You know why? We've been married 30 years, and here we were having the same argument about the same thing that we never seemed to get over. I don't know if any other married women know what I'm talking about, but there's just some issues that continue to come up, and for whatever reason, when it came up in December, it took me down. I was just so discouraged. I thought, again, why can't we be one in this? And so you know what, quite honestly, I just got a little guarded around him, a little more isolated. Well, then I went home very end of December to see our family, my parents, right after Christmas. And my daddy had had a really tough year of being sick, and we had almost lost him a couple of times, and that had really rocked my world because I'm just one of those blessed women who just has a hero dad. But he had been okay until I got home for Christmas. And he started running a fever, ended up in the emergency room, admitted into the hospital. I ended up in tears. By the time we left Florida, I physically was shaking, and I honestly thought, is there no place in my life that is safe? During this whole time, there was this undertow of grief and fear that I was fighting because I was about to live in an empty nest. Our youngest son was about to leave for college, and he was my buddy, my debate partner. I mean, every morning we would listen to NPR together. He told me what to think. I mean, since he's gone off to college, I have no idea what my opinions are. But I was so dreading him leaving, and I was grieving in advance, and I knew that my nest was about to be as empty as my heart. And so that's exactly what I did not tell them when I talked for an hour in Tasia. Well, of course, my friends did what you would do, right? We know how to cheer each other and comfort each other and console each other, and nothing was working. And so when nothing else works, what do? We go shopping. And so we went to one of our favorite boutiques, and as we walked in, there was evidently this big jewelry table right there at the front door. So we stopped. We only got a few steps into the store, and they start picking up jewelry, and I hear Joan say, "Oh my goodness, this is such a cute ring." And then Paula says, "Oh, look at this bracelet. Jennifer, you would like this bracelet." Well, I am just empty. And so I thought, well, I'll start feeling around. So I start feeling around on the jewelry table, and I feel these beads. I'm like, oh, these feel kind of pretty and fun. And then I feel at the very bottom a key. And I showed it to Paula, and I said, what is this? It's a key at the bottom of this necklace. What is this? And she pauses, and I think, she's trying to see it. She can't, how middle-aged eyes are. She can't see. I love making jokes about other people's eyesight. Anyway, I think she can't see it, right? But that's not why she paused. So when she spoke, her voice just held so much wonder. She said, "The key says, safe. Safe. You're safe." Well, of course, I held it to my heart, and it was like I heard the Lord say to me, "You're safe with me. I've got this. I know how you feel. I know what you fear. You're not alone. I am with you in every season and in every situation. You're safe with me." Well, of course, I overpaid for the necklace. But it was my shepherd's way of reminding me that it is not in our situations where we find our safety. It is not in peaceful seasons or green pastures where we find our safety. It is with our shepherd where we find our safety. Some of you may feel vulnerable. Maybe those emotions that you haven't been able to quite name represent that maybe you don't feel safe either, because you haven't found your ultimate safety in your shepherd. Well, our good shepherd, Jesus, he knows exactly how you feel. He knows what you would fear. And that's why he says to you and me in Luke 12 that we are to have no fear. Okay, so turn in your Bibles to Luke 12, verse 32. Luke 12, verse 32. Luke 12:32 is Jesus speaking to his disciples, and he says this, "Do not fear, little flock. Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Now let me give you the context of Luke chapter 12. So Jesus knows that his disciples are about to enter a really tough season. The pressure is rising for them, persecution is mounting, and he knows that they're about to face some really hard things. And there's going to be fears that rise up in them, and vulnerabilities and insecurity. And he wants to prepare them and let them know, little flock, don't be afraid. And so by the time he says this in verse 32, he's already mentioned several things that really represent what all of us fear and difficulties that we have to face. So that's what we're going to look at. What the little flock does not need to fear because we're safe with our shepherd, okay? The first one is in verse 4. Luke 12, verse 4. In Luke 12, verse 4, Jesus says to his disciples, "Do not fear those who can kill the body, but then after that can do no more." Now, think about that. What fear do you think Jesus is referring to when he says, "Don't fear those who can kill the body, but then after that can do no more. Often we think death, right? I mean, that's something all of us fear, or at least that's something that we grapple with. So here's the thing. I know you and I, as believers in Christ, we don't need to fear death, right? Jesus conquered death. We know that he has already mastered that for us. We can trust in him. So technically, quote unquote, we're not supposed to fear death, right? But let's be honest with the sisters. I don't know about you, but I fear the process of death. I mean, there's so much uncertainty. We don't know when. We don't know how. There's some uncertainty there. It can make us feel very vulnerable. And even when it comes to not even just our own passing, but what about people we love? Oh, sisters, I have struggled this past year with fear over my daddy passing. Fear. Just that planet Earth won't be safe anymore if he's gone. We fear others passing whom we love. Some of you know way too well what I'm talking about. There's a lot of fear there. But the verse also says, do not fear those who can kill the body. In other words, it's not just death that Jesus is talking about that we might fear. Don't fear those who can kill. In other words, don't fear people who can hurt you. Because truthfully, people can hurt us. You love somebody. You become vulnerable to them. And then maybe they reject you, or they walk away, or they're unkind. We can be afraid of being hurt. And therefore we can live guarded, right? So Jesus knows that we're going to fear people hurting us. We're going to fear the process of death. And he says to us, little flock, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. What does Psalm 23 verse 4 say? Yea, even when you walk through that valley of the shadow of death, you do not need to fear any evil, for I am with you. You are safe with your shepherd. He is with you. Second thing that we often fear is in verse 11. Luke 12, verse 11. Jesus says to his disciples that when you are called before the synagogues or the magistrates or authorities, don't worry about how you will defend yourself or what you will say. Now remember, the persecution was rising for the disciples. So Jesus knew they were about to be called on the carpet and give an account. And he knew that they would be afraid, that they could maybe fear feeling abandoned, or they could fear feeling inadequate. Like, what am I going to say? How am I going to defend myself? I mean, we all fear maybe even being ashamed sometimes because we don't feel like we really know what to say or how to show up and be the right person at the right time with the right things. I don't know how many of you have a rewind button that you push at the end of the day, and you rewind everything you've said and review everything you wish you had said, and we fear feeling embarrassed and ashamed. Or we wonder, am I really going to be enough for this task? Am I really going to be adequate to be the mom I need to be? Am I really going to be able to show up at work and do it like I'm supposed to do it? Am I going to be adequate? Or even worse, when it really matters, when it really counts, am I going to be abandoned? Am I going to be alone? Well, Jesus says to his little flock in verse 12 that you don't need to worry about those things because the Holy Spirit, at the very hour you need it, will teach you what to say. You will not be alone. You will not be abandoned. Psalm 23, verse 5 says that your shepherd, he prepares a table before you in the presence of your enemies. He anoints your head with oil. Why? Because his Spirit will show up at the very moment you need him most. Your cup overflows. Why? Because you don't need to worry about being adequate. You will be more than adequate. You don't need to fear those things, little flock. You are safe with your shepherd because he's with you. third thing that we fear is in verse 22. Luke 12, verse 22. Jesus says to his little flock, do not fear. Don't worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. Well, there you go. That sums it up. We can go home now. That's about it, right? Your life. Don't worry about your life. Don't you wish it were that easy to just say, okay? But we do worry about our lives, what we will eat, our bodies, what we will wear. Now, clearly, Jesus is speaking to that base issue, that base need of being cared for and being protected and having what we need, basic provisions. But you know, it shows up in other ways in our lives too. It really does. I mean, I don't know if I'm the only one who changes clothes several times before I go anywhere, especially if it involves being in front of an audience. I do worry about what I'm going to wear. Don't worry about your body. I have a sweet friend who, when we would talk about retirement, you know, what we were going to do, she wanted to travel, and she said, as long as I have my health. Well, she doesn't have her health, and she can't be active anymore. And she worried so much about it. We do worry. What if we lose our health? What if, I mean, think of it this way even. Don't worry about your body, what you will eat. I mean, what if I never lose the weight? We worry about these physical things. Jesus knows how you feel. He knows what you fear. But your shepherd says to you in Psalm 23, verse 1, that you shall not want. In other words, in him you lack nothing, because he is everything you need, and in him you will have everything you need. So don't worry, little flock. Don't be afraid, little flock, because your shepherd is with you. Last fear is in verse 32. It's the first verse that we looked at. When Jesus says, do not fear, do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Now, what is it that Jesus is talking about here when he says, don't be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom? Sometimes we think, well, is it that we fear that God's not going to give us the kingdom? Well, I don't know about you, but I don't tend to fear that. I mean, I really believe if God says he's going to do it, he's going to do it. If he says I'm going to give you the kingdom, he's going to give us the kingdom. That's not usually what we fear. Here's what I think we fear. We fear if it's his good pleasure. Is it really his good pleasure to give me what he promises? In other words, am I really loved and accepted by him? Or am I really his delight? Am I his good pleasure? Or am I just his responsibility, his drudgery, his duty? Gotta go feed the mangy sheep. Sometimes I think we fear that we are more his target of judgment than we are his source of joy. Sometimes I think our deepest fear is not that God will not do something for us, but it's how he feels about us, that we're more his obligation than we are his source of affection. We fear that God may not really like us. But you see, little flock, God's goodness toward us has nothing to do with our greatness. He knows we are a little flock, little in strength, sometimes little in faith. But the Lord is our shepherd, and he knows that you will always be a sheep, that you will have the vulnerabilities of a sheep, that you will be needy like a sheep. And though you may fear that God may not love you, verse 6 of Psalm 23 says that his goodness and mercy will never leave you. They will follow you every single day of your life. And you may feel like, oh, I'm just an outsider. I just really don't fit in. No, your shepherd says that you're family, that you will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So little flock, don't be afraid, because it is your shepherd's good pleasure to give you peace and rest in the green pastures. It is his good pleasure to lead you beside those still waters. It is his good pleasure to restore you back to himself when you wander. It is his good pleasure to lead you in the right paths for his namesake. It is his good pleasure for him to give you companionship and comfort when the valleys get so dark. Little flock, it is your Father's good pleasure to prepare a table before you in the presence of your enemies, to anoint your head with oil, to bless you with such abundance until your cup overflows. And little flock, do not be afraid, for it is your Father's good pleasure to chase you every day with his goodness and with his mercy until he brings you home, to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Sisters, the key to feeling safe is being with the shepherd in every season and in every situation. And all the sisters said, Amen. Amen.
Safe in the arms of Jesus. Safe, I'm safe. Safe in the arms of Jesus. I'm safe.